Camp Bread Baking 101. I'm Doug Wilson, the photographer is Alan Wilson, and today we're going to make a couple loaves of white bread. Start off bread baking by scalding 1 cup of milk. You can use, this is 2%, but you could use 1% whole milk. Skim milk would be okay, just to add a little extra richness to the bread. So you pour that in a saucepan, and then stick it over here on the stove on medium heat, and that will take about 5 minutes. While we're waiting for the milk, we'll get started with the dry ingredients. I'm going to put kind of fluff up the flour so that it's not all packed down. I'm going to put 3 cups in the pot, and then I'm going to add to that 4 teaspoons of yeast, which is the equivalent of 2 packages. And we'll just stir that around a little bit, get the yeast mixed in there. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes. If you look over here at the milk, you can see the little bubbles all the way around the outside. You may see a wisp of steam, but that's what's classified as scalding. So we'll turn the heat off and bring this over to our counter. Put it on a little hot pad. And to that we will add oil, sugar, and water. We'll add the sugar first. Need 3 tablespoons. 3 tablespoons of oil. And then we'll stir it up. Okay, now we're going to add 1.25 cups of water. I added 1 cup of water, and it's at 116 degrees, so that's pretty good. So I'm going to pour that in there. And then I'm going to get 2 more ounces, 1/4 cup of water. We'll use that to rinse this pan out so we can not leave any of the sugar or milk behind. And then we'll bring this over and stir it up. And you're going to stir it up until it's fairly smooth. See what it looks like, pretty soupy mess. Of course, only half the flour's in there right now. Okay. Well, I added some more flour, so we can add up to another 3 cups. So kind of as we get more flour, you'll see that it starts to pull away from the edge of the bowl. We'll be wanting to turn more into a ball. It's still pretty sticky, but you can see it's coming together. So that was 4 cups. This will be 5. So we got 1 more. Kind of get to this point, we're going to add the salt to it, which is 2 teaspoons. Continue to stir that about. See, it's really kind of turning into a ball now and drying out. I'm going to dump that on the countertop here. Take a little flour and put down there to keep it from sticking too much. It's too sticky, we can add a little more flour. timer for 10 minutes. And we'll start to knead. Be a little bit sticky at first. It'll stick to your hands. You can rub the extra dough off. Try and get all the little crumbs put in there. It's really turning into a ball now. You kind of squish it out, fold it in half, turn it a little bit. Keep doing that. Keep going around. If you're baking bread for the first time, it would be a good idea to measure all your flour out so that you have a finite amount to work with, so that you don't overdo it and put too much flour in, because it will make a really heavy loaf. You can see when you start it's very sticky. You'll have to use some of the dry flour and rub your hands together to get sticky dough off of them. Once you kind of get the dough ball together, the stickiness will increase. You can continue putting flour out of your supply to keep the surface dry. When it's finished, it will not stick to your hands, but it'll still be a fairly soft dough. A couple of things we've noted over the years as we've made our bread. For a while we were using a mixer to knead the bread, and we found it was fairly easy to over knead it and get too much flour in it, and you would get a really dense loaf. Another mistake you could make, you might be able to double this recipe and still have a workable piece of dough, but if you double it, quadruple it, it gets unmanageable in size. You're far better off to make it in smaller batches and put them together when you're done in a big pot, and that'll work out. While you're watching, I can give you a brief history of the winter camp bread baking. It's one of the oldest traditions in winter camp. Initially it was started because the winter camp 1 people were too cheap to buy pre-made bread. We thought we could save a few cents on it, and that's how we kept the price down to $13.13 for the first winter camp. At the time, none of us had ever made bread before, or even tried it at home. We got a recipe from my mom's Betty Crocker cookbook, which this is a somewhat adapted version that we made it a little bit easier based on experience and improving the directions. Overall, bread baking takes about 3 hours, although there's only about a half hour where you're actually doing anything. Most of it's just waiting for it to either rise or bake. Here's the dough ball. So we'll take that and put it in a bowl. You lightly grease a bowl, keep it from sticking. Put it in there until it doubles in size. So remember that size, and we'll see it in about 45 minutes. Okay, it's been 45 minutes, and you'll see the bread has risen. Roughly maybe a little bit bigger than double its size. So what we do now is punch it down to get the extra air out of it. Put that down there. Don't need the bowl anymore. Alright, then you knead it a few times. Gonna press it out to get the air out of it. And now it's about back to the same size it was when we started. Alright, so I've got 2 pans over here that I'm going to make. You can really bake bread in just about anything. This is a big loaf pan. This is a 12-inch loaf pan. I'm going to grease that. Whatever you put it in, when you're putting the unrisen dough in, you want to fill it about half full. If you fill it, if you fill it over half full, it can escape and go down the side or whatever. If it's less than half full, it just won't be a real high loaf. So, good rule of thumb is half full. And that's a pretty big loaf. So, and then I've got just this other miscellaneous pan. I think this really came out of a toaster oven. But I can fit this in the oven on the same shelf next to that large pan, and that's why I selected that. Also to show that you can put it in pretty much anything. So just putting a little crystal, and we're just going to bake like a French loaf or whatever on there. Okay. Rather than making 2 loaves of bread, you could also use the dough to make rolls or cinnamon rolls. Cinnamon rolls, you'd roll it into a square, sprinkle it with the cinnamon and sugar. You could add some raisins in there if you want, and then roll it up pretty tightly. You could either you can cut it with a string or with a sharp knife. Place it in a pan and let it rise. When you're done, you could eat them as is with some butter on them, or you could glaze them with some icing made of confectioner's sugar and milk. We've also used this recipe for pizza crust. It makes an acceptable crust. We'll cover those with a towel and set the timer for half an hour, at which time we'll turn the oven on to 375 so it can preheat. After about 15 minutes, it'll be ready to put the bread in the oven. Okay, it's been about 45 minutes and the oven's hot. And there's what we've got so far. That looks pretty good. This was a little bit light on the dough, as you recall. That's why it's a little bit smaller. You can see how much the other one rose. So I'm going to stick these in the oven now in the center rack for 30 minutes. When you get the bread out of the oven, it's important to put it on a rack or elevate it in some way so the crust doesn't get soggy from steaming if you put it on a counter or plate or something. If you're going to eat it right away, you want to probably let it cool for about 20 minutes so that it's cool enough to slice and eat. If you're going to save it for another meal, you ought to let it cool completely, which may take a couple hours. It should be completely room temperature to the touch before you put it into any kind of bag or anything.